and welcome back to Bloody Elbow's CineMMA Classics, the combat sports movie podcast where we're talking about the all-time greatest hits in movie history, film history, focusing on combat sports. Last time we watched a all-time classic starring Robert Ryan called The Setup. And tonight we are hitting with, I don't know if it's quite what I'd call a boxing movie, but it's something like a boxing movie. To me, it's the best MMA movie of all time, Hard Times. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, John Nash.
Hey, Zane. Yep, I would agree. I would classify it as the best, specifically the best underground fight movie ever made, which is almost a genre. Blood sport, what is it? Never Back Down. That was the other one. This is by far the best, and people should credit it as the best, which they don't. They don't acknowledge that. We're going to demand that you acknowledge that by the end of the show.
Yeah, there's no. If you are into the idea, I don't even know if you call it NHB or like No Holds Barred, but if you're into that whole like underground fight club idea, including Fight Club, Hard Times is like the all-time random holy grail of combat sports movies you've never heard of, because it's not only well choreographed and specifically targeted to an era of combat sports history where the whole like underground fight thing wasn't just like this, crazy in my head idea like, oh no, I've seen the Kumite on the islands. And it's like, no, you haven't. Come on. Yeah, there's a secret Kumite we all go to every 5 years, and people die there. And nobody's ever actually seen it except Frank Dux, who licenses it to his story to Bloodsport for God knows what reason. Imagine having seen people kill each other in hand-to-hand combat, and the best port you can get for your life story is Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah, that's no comparison. In this film, we are blessed because probably one of the baddest ass actors of all time, one of the almost the definition of a manly, masculine, tough guy actor. Charles Bronson is the lead in this movie. And if you want to give us a quick summary of the movie for those that haven't heard of it before, aren't familiar with the plot?
Sure, yeah. So Hard Times, Charles Bronson plays this underground boxer, rough and tumble kind of boxer who basically just jumps off a freight train and finds the nearest underground boxing match where James Coburn, the movie's co-star, is managing a fighter who loses horribly, and Bronson approaches him and is just like, hey, put me, talk me into this underground boxing match. I'll put all my cash on it, $6, and we'll start working from there. We'll form a partnership, start making some money. I need to make some money. Turns out Bronson's an amazing boxer, of course. And, that's mostly what the movie's about. It's just, this amazing underground boxer and his slick, slightly weaselly manager, James Coburn, working their way through the New Orleans underground fight circuit.
Yeah, and it's also, for people that aren't aware too, what's interesting is they set it in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So that makes it gives it a little more flavor. You could feel the hardship why you would engage in this type of efforts in the Great Depression. If it was modern, you might look at them a little more like you guys are. That's the problem with a lot of underground fight movies nowadays. Is you guys come across as idiots taking part in this nowadays.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. It's that idea that it doesn't feel fictional. It feels representational of a moment in history. Unlike something like Bloodsport, which feels like it's like, okay, maybe this happened, but I don't.
But we know it didn't. We really know it did. No one's doing the splits in a fight.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. But the other interesting thing I thought about the movie is the combat too. It's not just pure underground boxing. It's bare knuckles boxing. And really, it's the rules they state are anything goes except you can't fight on the ground. And There's probably a good reason for that because there's gravel and concrete on the ground. They fight just like in warehouses and dockyards. But it's also a throwback to old boxing rules like Broughton rules and Mendoza rules, where anything went in a boxing match as long as you stand it up and punch. Still, you could sneak in kicks, you could pull hair, you could do a lot of stuff back in those days. So
Yeah.
it's that's why I think you always considered an MMA movie, because the fighting is basically MMA fighting without the grappling on the ground.
Yeah, you see like some like basic forearm chokes, and you see kicks, and you see some like trips and throws and things like that, and it's just like it feels like, you know, it feels like the ideal of classic NHB fighting. It feels like I mean, you know, it feels like what modern MMA fans want, which is basically bad kickboxing without any of the stuff on the ground.
Yeah, and it comes with a great, like I said, it has James Coburn in it. And me personally, James Coburn, when I think about it intellectually, is miscast. He's too old to play the part he's playing. But watch him, he's so damn entertaining. I forgot about that. I don't think about that. He's very witty. He almost is the stereotypical manager who's always, you know, he's a gambler. He's throwing money. He can't hang on to money, and he's always looking for the next score. You got to, as I said, Charles Bronson is in it, and Bronson is the manliest man that ever manned a movie, so he's in it. And he really, I mean, you look at him, he's like in his 50s, he's just ripped. He just looks like a badass in the movie.
He's all yours.
Hey, Pops, you're a little old for this, ain't you?
You really, you know, you look at him and go, why don't I look that good? And I'm, you know, I guess I'm getting towards his age, but I'm like 10 years younger than the man at that point. There's no way. There's no way I'd look like that. So he's awesome in it. It's got, Jill Ireland, his wife, plays a part in it. She's not very good, but we can ignore her. Strother Martin's in it. He's awesome.
As his traveling doctor who's opium addicted and quotes Edgar Allan Poe because he claims to be a child or a relation to the great poet.
How much doping are you doing?
This month, my financial condition has prevented certain journeys of the imagination.
It's the debut film, as a directing debut, I should say, of Walter Hill. And let's get into Walter Hill a little bit here, because this is Walter Hill's directing debut, but he also made a name for himself doing some pretty good film screenplays before this, like Hickey and Boggs, if no one's ever seen that. It's a great detective story with Robert Culp and a man who I will not name because he's now a villain for life, but the movie's still great. And also The Getaway he did. The Steve McQueen Getaway, not the modern one. No, I should say not modern. It's, you know, the more recent one with Baldwin and Kim Basinger.
He also, I mean, Walter Hill for me, the big thing is mostly as a director, he's kind of right there with Altman as like one of the greatest opening periods of like directorial opening stanzas in a career. Where if you just look at from like Hard Times to 48 Hours, it's pretty much all amazingly good movies.
Yeah, they're fair. I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, you know, they're good movies. I don't consider them it's not the masterpieces some people had, I'd say.
But I haven't seen The Long Riders, and Southern Comfort is give or take for me. But still, I love Hard Times. I love The Driver. I love The Warriors. I love 48 Hours. These are all like great, fantastic, what they are action movies. Like
he actually is one of those great genre directors that popped up in the 70s who were doing kind of genre movies but smart. You had John Carpenter doing the horror movies and then the action movies when he's doing Assault on Precinct 13. Well, first he did Dark Star, then Assault on Precinct 13, which was awesome. Then Halloween, which is awesome, and then he directed The Fog, or was it? Then The Fog, I think, and then came. Not that anybody really cares, but we're just ripping them off because I wanted to get to The Thing and Escape from New York, which were like that run too is pretty goddamn impressive. Then you had John Milius, who almost had a similar career at the very beginning of Walter Hill. In fact, John Milius' directing debut with Dillinger is what got Hill this job. I think they used a lot of the same cars from Dillinger and stuff for this, same set pieces.
Oh yeah. That makes actually a lot of sense. I didn't even think about that connection, but the Dillinger John Milius collection or connection for Hard Times actually makes a lot more sense than I would have thought offhand.
But we shouldn't get too much in the film because this is about fighting and stuff. But I think the thing about Walter Hill is it'll probably put off a lot of people, but at the same time, what makes him interesting in these type of movies is he's unabashedly masculine filmmaker. His movies are about, like his idea of manly ethos.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at that whole run he was talking about, and it culminates with Streets of Fire, which is just like him jerking off over all of his teenage masculine ideals into one movie that he couldn't quite fit into all the movies he made before that.
I mean, there's an interesting group of directors actually that they're terrible. Some of them are fine. Some of the stuff I don't argue with Hill, but some of the terrible ideas, like some of the terrible belief system Sam Peckinpah has in his ideology, they put in their films. But at the same time, I'm like, I gotta admit, it makes the film more interesting.
Yeah, no,
like it brings a layer to the film that wouldn't be there if they weren't. If Paul Schrader wasn't insane, Hardcore Taxi Driver would not have been as interesting storylines if he didn't put his insanity into the films.
No, absolutely. And with Peckinpah, I mean, people point out Straw Dogs and like, oh my God, this, overwhelming like rape.
Oh, it's pure misogyny. That movie.
Then it's like, okay, yeah. So you can look at that and be like, wow, that's a really powerful, weird thing to put into a movie. And then you watch every other Sam Peckinpah movie. It's like, okay, there's actually a rape scene in every single movie he ever made.
Yeah, and it's like, I think you're trying to tell us something, Sam, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know if I want to hear it is, but at the same time, like, because he had such a strong vision, is insane and kind of, like I said, very outdated Neanderthalic vision that he had. It still made for very interesting movies because his vision was pushed so strong on you. And Walter Hill, let's say Walter Hill is not nearly that bad. Walter Hill actually, in some ways, he's got much more progressive viewpoints on male-female relationships in a lot of his movies than Sam Peckinpah ever did. But you can just see him pushing off this idea like this is what a man does. This is how a man behaves. And in this movie in particular, we get a lot of this. It also borrows a lot from westerns and samurai flicks.
Yeah.
Which borrow from each other so much you just take from one and you got both basically. But I remember going to a screening Walter Hill had of this movie, and he talked about specifically the western samurai influence because when he got the script to do this movie, he took his own western script and married it with it. So that's where a lot of the visuals come from. So you'll watch it and you'll see the character seems like a western, but relevant to our discussion about the fight business, I find one of the things I liked about the movie was the portrayal of fighting. The fight choreography is pretty damn realistic in this movie.
It is. It is benefits a lot in the same way the setup benefited from the idea of like you're not watching the best boxers in the world. You're not supposed to be like this isn't supposed to be the elite of all time great technical boxing.
Oh, all of his opponents look like early tough cast applicants.
Yeah,
they look a little they're big. They look a little strong, a little big, but a little doughy, and maybe not that edgy. But that's like you're like, oh, who's those guys that tried out for tough but didn't make it? They apparently they were in this movie.
Exactly. But to that end though, it's actually like for their bare knuckle boxing. So there's a lot of focus on body work, a lot because you break your hands if you punch somebody in the head.
They even have that. One guy used the strategy of using his head. The headbutt technique on the fist.
There's a lot of focus on hand blocking and on parrying and countering and things like that. That, you go the Rocky route and we're just going to trade 5-punch combinations over and over and over again. And nobody ever counters and nobody ever really stops anything until that seminal moment when Rocky has to win and he finally blocks one punch. And from there on, everything turns on.
Yeah, there's defense in this movie, which you don't see in a lot of movies. They're actually defending. They're slipping punches and countering when you slip. He does a feint. He does this obvious feint, but when you watch the movie, you can see that the intent. He does a feint, and when the opponent reacts to it, then he comes with a combination. And because his opponent's not talented enough to throw combinations or defend him, that's how he beats them with 3-punch combinations. Yeah, little stuff like that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and even. even people like Connor Rebush, who does this Heavy Hands podcast in the Vivisection with me, he loves this movie because of the choreography, in part because it spends so much time actually having taken pages from and learned about bare knuckle boxing and integrating that into the movie rather than just being a another kind of Rocky or your generic boxing movie, even Raging Bull, where they're just sort of like this cinematic idea of what boxing could be like rather than the sport itself.
Yeah, Raging Bull is much more the idea of it's in the head of Jake LaMotta, the fight scenes.
Yeah.
So it's like it's an interpretation of what it would be like to feel or be there. Where this is a realistic presentation. If you were there to witness it, what would it look like?
Yep.
It does. I mean, one thing it does, it borrows from. I remember Walter talked about this. He borrowed from samurai flicks for especially the final fight scene, because some of the great samurai sword fights, you can see the strategy as they're fighting, and he wanted to show that.
Yeah.
And you can really see the strategy, the combatants' footwork and stuff, and a lot. I guess the credit goes to the two supporting actors that play as opponents in the movie are great stuntmen, Robert Stressier and Nick Dimitri, who plays opponent people. If people watch, like if you've seen The Longest Yard and other movies, you'll recognize them as character actors. But they're all-time great combat fight scene stunt coordinators in Hollywood, and so they sell a lot.
Yeah, that is actually one of the things. Like I wasn't aware of their legacies personally, but it was one of the things that really was clear watching this. It's like they very clearly just cast really good stuntmen as opponents and like in minor roles to make that natural, because that's what you need to make fight scenes look good. Is you need to actually put stuntmen in as like and give them choreography rather than trying to choreograph actors as fighters.
Oh yeah. Another thing I liked about the movie is it's I guess one thing that relates today a little bit is I guess the fight biz, even though it's based on the old gambling system. And I guess you can go back all the way to Broughton's Rules of Boxing, where it had rules specifically in it about how the purse was held. All that stuff, this is taken from like London prize fighting, purse holding rules. You're watching it, and even the split between the boxer and his manager. But it's the idea. Part of it that fits in. I love is when Speed, who's James Coburn's character, tells Bronson's character Cheney, okay, this is the cut, how it's going to work, and
50-50 on all scratch bets and expenses. All side bets, I keep 75%. That's how it works.
I would love to see a fighter nowadays do what Bronson says. No, this is how the cut's going to work.
Yeah, that's
almost like he's talking to a promoter. No, you don't get that much. And he even says, he goes, James Coburn goes, as Speed goes, I'm taking all the risk and put up all the money. And then Bronson just looks at him. You're taking all the risks.
Put up all the money. I take all the risks.
No, I mean that's one of the things I want to talk about a bit with this movie, which is it makes it a very fun movie outside the realm of great combat sports movies. Because as we know, most great combat sports movies are tragedies. Most of your really good ones, even what makes the first Rocky movie a pretty good movie in the end is that he loses, and like that's not this triumphant story. But one of the things that really works for this is that everybody else feels incredibly realistic in their role. And then Charles Bronson is just this sort of like mythic underground boxing character, which really plays into Walter Hill's own love of mythos. Like if you watch other Walter Hill movies, things like The Warriors and The Driver, creating this ideal of this like mythical action figure. I mean, it's it comes across most easily in The Warriors, where when Walter Hill got a chance to recut it and ruin it, he had this whole like animated 300 idea added to it, where it had this whole comic book taken from the Spartans fighting, in ancient Greece. And you're like, yeah, okay, we get it. You really love this mythological idea of masculinity. But in a movie like Hard Times, it's much more of a like subtle, less ostentatious idea of just like everybody else is this weaselly, greasy, underhanded, double-dealing, classic combat sports figure. And then in the middle of it all, you've got Charles Bronson, who's the fighter who not only wins but like keeps afloat, like keeps all his money and keeps ahead of everybody else as he's going, which is just like, if you follow combat sports, that's kind of like,
yeah, I mean, basically, Charles Bronson plays a Taishiro Mifune or Clint Eastwood character, or
Mhm.
he's kind of like is almost the same character he played in a bizarre way in Once Upon a Time in the West,
yeah,
where he's this, that he comes in, but he's almost a mythical character, that in Once Upon a Time in the West, the three main cowboys are almost all godlike demigods, and everybody else is a normal person in the West.
exactly. Like you almost get the feeling the way Hill wanted to present this movie when Bronson steps off the train. There's almost a sense that like Bronson had never actually fought anyone before, and like, but he's just so naturally amazing at it that like everything carries from there. Like obviously he's supposed to have, but there's this feeling that like everything started at this moment, and he's just knows that he's great at it, and
Yeah, he's been doing a bunch of odd jobs, and this is the newest one he's going to try.
exactly.
Yeah.
And he's
There's also a lot of like Shane feeling to this. Like he shows up, he does his job, he saves the town or whatever, then takes off then leaves town again at the end. The mysterious. Who was that masked man? Cheney.
So to that point though, too, it's both kind of a strength and a weakness of the movie. I want to talk about the whole Jill Ireland thing because that was his wife, and he wanted her in the movie, and so she's in the movie. And weirdly, for people that are married, they have no chemistry together at all in it. Like this just it doesn't feel like you'd be like, these people don't even like each other. And you're like, oh, they're married? Oh. But it does actually make his character like that's like the actual real hit that his character gets to demystify him is this sort of relationship where suddenly he just kind of seems like a putz,
Yeah, I mean, we were the relationship with Jill Ireland, the screenplay of it, the storyline of it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's just because it spells out. It's a mirror in a weird way of his relationship with his manager, where I don't want to give anything away, but at the end, she kind of does something, to him that he realizes, oh, that's how I was treating Speed, my manager.
Yeah.
And so that it's a huge plot point device, but it's like she doesn't belong in the movie. That she's I don't want to make it too because people are gonna think, oh, it's terrible because she's terrible in it, but it's still watch. She's still.
I honestly think that it's less her fault than it is. Like, I mean, Bronson's not a bad actor. I don't dislike him as an actor, but I do think that the fact that he has like less than 500 words total in this script is good. Because the scene where like they sit down together and he's like explaining what he does and how he fights and all that, there's some lines in there that he just seems to like slog through, where he's saying stuff where he's just like, oh man.
Yeah, I don't. Well, he got upset at Walter Hill over those scenes. He didn't think he was directed properly or edited afterwards. He didn't think he did his wife justice. But everything else turned out. I'd say I think I kind of disagree though. I think Charles Bronson's a lot like Clint Eastwood in that he really understands his star persona.
Mm-hmm.
Like he really knows, less is better for him. If you ever seen Death Wish, he actually plays really convincingly just a middle class guy.
Yeah,
regular dude. It makes it work. It makes it work into a liberal that descends into fascism because of what happened to his family. And then the director of that one, forget that director went off in a total nutsville after that. Talking about directors that push their own personal bizarre tastes, and his stuff is almost evil after that. His movies he's making after that movie.
Yeah, this isn't any hate for me of Charles Bronson as an actor. It's just if somebody actually like really kind of slogged through the script in this movie, it kind of felt like him. Like when he had to say more than 2 lines together, it really just felt very clipped and very like.
I do. I mean, I wonder how much of it too is that he looked at it as a purely like this is just a low rent movie. I'm going to make some money.
That could be.
I mean, the original script of this movie too is interesting enough. It's called The Street Fighter before Walter Hill took over, and The Street Fighter was just as set. The movie was made in the 70s, so it was just about a 70s era underground fighter. So a lot, and I wonder how many elements continue. I mean, weird stuff. There's stuff in this movie like you watch it goes, man. I wonder, people watch the UFC watch this because there's a fight where he has to take off a guy. He fights a guy in like a factory area, and they go into this area, and they basically put him in a cage. If someone was going to compete with the UFC in the early '90s, they should have saw this movie. Go, okay, forget the octagon. This will be our cage.
The big sort of wrestling, pro wrestling, steel cage match kind of cage. But
fans are lined up all around it. You can almost stand on it, overlooking. They're looking down at them fighting.
And the fight, the sets in it are iconic enough in that way that somebody I pointed out recently. I was seeing that like it was Street Fighter. They became Street Fighter 2 levels. So that
really, I don't play video games, so I wouldn't.
Oh well, jeez, you just I know it's not hip enough for you, but like Ken's level in Street Fighter 2 was a tugboat. And like a barge next to a tugboat in the back that's basically just a taken shot from this, from the dock fight between what's his name?
Stressier's character.
Yeah,
the bald guy from
and
Tessier, Henry, I think he's called or something.
And then the cage that we're describing was used as Zangief's level in Street Fighter 2. It became like the big Russian like industrial cage that you fight Zangief in. So
those names mean nothing to me.
The big hairy Russian guy with the little red shorts who like throws people around Street Fighter.
I'm not familiar with Street Fighter, so I don't know.
You were young enough to have been like almost fresh-faced when these games started coming out. So
I just did not get it. If it wasn't Punch-Out was like the only fighting game I played.
Okay, wow.
I was like Tecmo Bowl. If you want to talk Bo Jackson and Tecmo Bowl, I can talk forever about I was the Raiders, could not be stopped in that game.
You are no help right now at all.
Okay, well.
I'm glad to find that for your incredible depth of film knowledge that you have a massive glaring hole in the realm of video games.
Except Ultima. I used to play Ultima when I was younger. That one we can talk about, but and Wizardry.
Anyway, so there are people did see this movie and it did become thing. Like it did imprint onto other things.
Yeah, it's in a weird way, it's a lot like The Warriors, I think. Maybe more cultish. The Warriors was kind of big when it came out. I remember it was in the theaters, it was a big deal. And then it disappeared for years. I mean, it was on TV occasionally, and I mean, it was a really cult movie. I would talk to people, and they'd never seen the movie for years. And then for some reason, it blew up again, in the last 10 years. And I'm hoping maybe Hard Times will go through this, because this movie really deserves a rediscovery. Instead of all you MMA fans, instead of checking out and worshiping, Bloodsport or Never Back Down or any of these other terrible underground combat movies,
or The Wrestler, you have to just go with like the Wrestler because you don't have any MMA movies, and you're just like, well, that the pro wrestling Randy the Ram movie, that was great, whatever.
Yeah, that's acceptable. Well, that's a good drama.
Acceptable, but there is something out there for you, like there's
a real MMA movie in a weird way. Yeah. Even though they don't call it MMA, it's a freaking damn MMA movie by all.
Yeah.
Forget the movies that you've been watching and worshiping people, and that's all I'm saying. There's a really good movie. We don't have to fake that the movies you like are good. There's an actual good one out there you can go check out. Maybe it's not. It's okay. It's not on par with The Setup and Raging Bull and Fats. The top boxing movies are the top 4 or 5 boxing movies ever made. You could argue are the best movies of the years they came out. That they're the 4 or the 5 of the best movies ever made. But this is a very good movie. It's on par with the next tier boxing movies. It's better than anything that's been made about MMA, that's for sure. It's almost as there's only 2 wrestling movies at the top of my head, pro wrestling movies that I think compare to it that are that level. One of which is The Wrestler, which I think is a drama, is pretty good. The others, which we'll get to probably some other Night in the City, if you call that a wrestling movie.
Yeah, we will definitely be getting to Night in the City at some point, especially because that too is sort of your. It's a shoot. So when you've got a shoot, then you've basically almost got MMA.
You got an MMA movie. There's that pro wrestling MMA connection. So, but I don't know what else. Is there anything else you want to talk about this movie? I don't want to give away too much because I want people to see it and be surprised.
My only other real thought on this, honestly, with Walter Hill in general, is that it's a great example of, especially early in his career, how good Walter Hill was at shaping his script to the actors he had to work with. Because, like, in this movie, you really do, you've got James Coburn basically gets all the lines to carry all the action, and then Charles Bronson gets, like, 500 words, and it's just, like, the perfect balance. Or, you go to the driver with, Ryan O'Neal.
Ryan O'Neal.
And he carries most of the script, and then they have Isabella Gianni, and she gets like 500 words.
Well, the driver, Ryan O'Neal barely spoke in The Driver.
Well, okay, he barely spoke, but they didn't try to develop any chemistry. He doesn't try to develop any chemistry or any dialogue that doesn't need to be there. Very purposeful scripting.
But it's almost the same thing though with The Driver, because Ryan O'Neal doesn't speak much. They have Bruce Dern.
Yeah, that's right. It's Bruce Dern's the one who gets all the lines and carries all the action. There we go.
Bruce Dern almost plays the part of Coburn. He gets a lot of the funny lines, and even though he's it's just a jerk, he's the antagonist in it. He gets all the comedy lines. But one thing this does show about Walter Hill too, I think this is the first example of how good Walter Hill was at fight scenes.
Yeah.
You see this, you see the Warriors has some of the best fight scenes ever choreographed, I think, in a movie.
And 48 Hours is iconic for its action movie fight scene between Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. And who the fuck would think you could choreograph a great fight scene between Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy?
Apparently Walter Hill did.
He saw something and it worked. In the meantime, though, this is really good, and you all need to see it. So I think that's as much as we can say. All right, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find John on Twitter at HeyNotTheFace. You can find both of us over at Bloody Elbow, where John does a bunch of big technical pieces on the industry side of MMA, and I do all the kind of bullshit that just keeps the site running day to day. I'll be back next week I'll be back later this week, rather, for another MMA Depressed Us, maybe another Vivisection, depending on what the regional MMA scene's throwing up out there. I haven't checked as deeply as I should. And then we'll be back after that, getting ready for UFC 223, where we'll have the Vivisection and Care Don't Care, and we'll do a 6-round post-fight show and all the stuff we normally do for a big UFC card, pulling out all the stops on that. And John, you'll be back with Show Money when?
When something interesting happens and we want to do it. It's once a month we do it about, so we're waiting for another event that's worthwhile.
So thanks everyone for tuning in. We will be back as soon as I can motivate John to watch another movie. And until then, thanks everyone. Oh, final word. Like the video, thumbs up down there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. All that stuff really helps a lot. Thanks.